because we were going to be after lunch, that I try to be provocative. And I think during lunch there was a little bit of provocation. So we'll see if I can help continue some provocation. In the interest of full disclosure, I'd like you to know that I am wearing a BLM uniform component over which I have pasted an Old Spanish Trail Association emblem. I am a pensioned federal employee, and I served as an archaeologist with the BLM most recently in Nevada. Because of my experience as an archaeologist in Nevada and the Great Basin, I was familiar with some comrades in the Bureau of Land Management a number of years ago that were struggling with, new to them, this National Trail Systems Act. BLM, during my career, grew a consciousness. When I came into the BLM in 1978, I didn't have a clue about the National Trail Systems Act. When I left the BLM 5 years ago, I had a clue. I had been forced to deal with a National Historic Trail, particularly the Pony Express National Historic Trail, as one of our cultural resources. But I also understood that the way that the legislation guiding how that act was implemented was very different from the act that I was far more familiar with, which was the Archaeological Resource Protection Act. Well, what do these two pieces of legislation have in common? I think the primary thing they have in common is that they don't work unless there is volunteerism. Neither of these pieces of legislation are possible to be implemented unless we have good citizens out on the ground stewarding these resources. I wish the Archaeological Resources Protection Act had the provisions that the National Trail Systems Act has for encouraging volunteerism. And that's the first topic on this 6-point handout. So you all can help hurry me along. I was thinking there were 6 major points I wanted to make. The first point is look at what the National Trail Systems Act says. It's not the Historic Trail Preservation Act. It is to provide for ever increasing outdoor recreation needs of an expanding population. I am very fearful that in the tension between preservation and development to implement this legislation, that we will forget that this legislation is to get people out to historic sites on the ground. Second, purpose of the act is to provide for a means of attaining these objectives by instituting a national system of recreation, scenic, and historic trails. So don't take the historic trails out of the mix of recreation and scenic. Those things have to work together just as much as archaeological protection, historic site preservation, and recreation. I look at the trails now. I didn't 5 years ago when I became involved in the Old Spanish Trail Association. I look at the trails now like I used to look at Chaco Culture National Historic Park. These trails are places where people should want to go, and where when they go there, they find things that they're fascinated with. The third part of the law of the mission statement of the National Trail Systems Act tells us what trail stewards should do, what it means to be a trail steward on the Old Spanish Trail or any other trail. The third part of the act says that it is to encourage and assist volunteer citizen involvement in planning, development, maintenance, and management. What else is there? It means that as individual citizen volunteers or parts of trail organizations, we are involved in everything having to do with the legal existence of these trails. That's point one. Secondly, what I've learned by being active in our trails organization is that there's a very specific mandate, like we were just talking about for the refuge. There are very specific provisions for this trail that are different from any other trail. And part of we as volunteers working on these trails is improving the level of understanding of why this particular trail, like any historic site, these are just huge, 2,700 miles of the Old Spanish Trail. They're huge historic sites, nationally significant historic sites, as well as for recreational purposes and on-site appreciation. So we need to keep the purpose of that specific trail at the top of our agenda as we try to manage it. It makes a real big difference if we're managing the Old Spanish National Historic Trail for its period of significance, 1829 to 1848. Makes a difference in how we manage that trail. What was the mode of transportation used for commerce on the Old Spanish Trail? People often create dioramas, interpretive information. They show wheeled vehicles going along the trail. It was not. There's no historical evidence. There's very little historical evidence of anything. There's no historical evidence that between 1829 and 1848 there was ever a wheeled vehicle on what's designated on this legal route, on your little map here, never wheeled vehicles there. So one of the things as an archaeologist that I'm interested in the public knowing is what's the mode of technology that people used. It was the common mode. It was the automobile. Mules were the automobile